at the most, Salazar should be banned from the sport for life. I'm convinced of that. Just off of this testosterone experiment, it's clearly designed to see how much testosterone you can use without eliciting a positive test. There's no doubt in my mind that that's what this is.
Yeah. I'm here to change the game up, I'm here to shuffle up the deck. You'll probably think I'm famous cause I got a blue check. I remember playing ball up in Montreal, Quebec. The richest people that I met, they said they really were from
tonight's episode of the Running Through It podcast. My name is Justin Horniker, and you're at the hub of all things Justin Horniker Running. It's kind of an episode, it's an emergency episode of the podcast. Emergency because we got big things to talk about, we got big things to run through, and a little bit different than what you may be used to. I don't have any guests on today because I want to take the time to try to avoid kind of rambling around, to take you through the big news that happened yesterday evening. That is Alberto Salazar being handed down a 4-year suspension from the sport by USADA. I want to take the time to make this kind of a read-along. Think of this as your audiobook to the contents of the independent counsel's decision, because I don't think a lot of people have really taking the time to read through this entire paper, this entire claim. There have been a lot of people saying certain things that I think we need to dial in on what is really important and what actually happened. The charge is essentially, if you remember me talking about the USADA report in the past, in the USADA report, they detailed, a couple big things. That is, Alberto Salazar's treatment of testosterone on his athletes, Alberto Salazar's testosterone experimentation, a lot of gray area stuff with L-carnitine, and working with Dr. Brown out of Houston, who also has been given a ban from the sport as well. So I just want to kind of get into it and explain, what this means. So Alberto Salazar is going to be appealing this. So it might not be over yet, but I think as we get into it, you'll see that the charges here are very serious. And in my mind, there's no possible way that this is going to get overturned. They'll say this as we get into it, but this is the biggest punishment they can give to a first-time offender under the current rules, barring putting your athletes in danger. And that's actually one of the things they'll say in the decision, is that Salazar and Nike Organ Project took efforts to make sure that the athletes were safe and everything along those lines. But that's also part of the reason why they're in trouble, is because they were testing these things out, which you can't do, and trying to circumvent anti-doping rules. To combat some of the things that I've been hearing of the naysayers of this, that Alberto Salazar isn't the biggest fish, why are we going after him for testosterone when people are using EPO? And I think it's good to point out that this is USADA. This isn't WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency. This is the United States Anti-Doping Agency. And Alberto Salazar is the big fish. This is someone who has been skeptical for a while, someone who we've been going after, who we've been wondering, due to their questionable tactics. And Travis Tygart, he's the one that took down Lance Armstrong, and once he gets his hooks into somebody, he's not going to let it go. And I think you'll see as we go through the evidence that USADA found a lot of shady things. And even if you argue that they're in the gray area, that they're in the spirit of leveling competition, it's still illegal. When you're an elite athlete, when you're coaching elite athletes, you agree to a standard. You agree to these rules that you're not going to break. So these anti-doping rules. While, when you think of performance enhancement, there's a lot of things that are performance enhancing. I like to look at the EPO argument. So you can do things that raise your natural EPO levels naturally. So you can go train altitude, you can live in an altitude tent. Those are two ways to raise your red blood cell count. You can do this legally as well. You can take EPO and you can blood dope. 2 of those are legal and perfectly acceptable. 2 of those are illegal. Taking EPO because you don't have access to altitude training does not then make it legal. So just doing something that's performance enhancing that you can do in other methods does not make it justifiable. And that's something that's important to remember. It's because it's not necessarily that the things that we might be putting into our bodies are dangerous or that this isn't something that somebody else is doing. It's that as a professional athlete, as a coach of Olympic level athletes, you have agreed that you're going to live your life by these standards. You're going to treat your athletes to the standard, and that you aren't going to try to circumvent these rules. And that is essentially where we're at with Alberto Salazar in this case. It's also important to remember that there aren't any athletes implicated in this. We can talk all we want about Galen Rupp and Mo Farah and Ethan Ritzenheim and what this might mean for them going forward. But it's also important to remember that in the past 4 years, Alberto Salazar has taken this news and stepped back from his responsibilities at Nike Oregon Project. So now, according to my inside sources, Pete Julian and Tim Roberry are the ones that are kind of in charge of the program. They're the ones working with the athletes, and while Salazar still has influence over the training, he's not there on a day-to-day basis, and he's not there working with the athletes. I can't say to what's going on with Galen Rupp and what's going on with Jordan Hsay, and how long that relationship has been the way it has been. I don't have sources on that, but I can tell you that the current crop of Nike Oregon Project athletes outside of Galen Rupp have not been working with Alberto Salazar. So take that how you will. I understand if you want to look at them with a grain of salt. I think we all kind of do. Any Nike Oregon Project thing is going to be looked at with that source of skepticism from here on out. And I think the fact that anyone involved with Nike Oregon Project has known about this case for 4 years. They've known about the shady dealings, the gray area dealings that Alberto Salazar has been dealing with. And they have decided to get into bed with that anyway. And I think that speaks maybe a little bit to their character, maybe a little bit to them not caring about what is going to happen next. That's just my opinion. So let's crack open a beer. Let's dive on in. So the American Arbitration Association is the people who, the event council oversaw it. The United States Anti-Doping Agency is the claimant against Alberto Salazar, the respondent. Here is the final award. So again, this is 144 pages. I'm going to try to skip through some parts. I kind of have an outline of what I want to cover and what isn't important because I've kind of read through this already. I'm going to read the procedural history, the procedural orders, because there's some interesting stuff in there as far as who was maybe acting in certain ways going into this whole investigation. This has been ongoing for 4 years, and Salazar has been actively fighting against this the past 2. From there, I'm going to get into the witness lists that for USADA and for Alberto Salazar. Then we're going to get into the background, the L-carnitine infusions and injections, the testimony from Magnus and other Nike Oregon Project whistleblowers, the alleged tampering. Then we're going to get into Salazar's personal use of testosterone, and then we're going to get into the testosterone experiment, which is the most damning thing about these whole charges to me. Then we're going to get into an interesting tidbit that doesn't end up sticking, but post-hearing charges for tampering or attempted tampering. That's something that wasn't part of the initial charge and was tacked on later, and we'll get into why that was. So let's get into, let's just jump right into this. You don't need. So the introduction. The case involves multiple anti-doping rule violation charges against respondent Alberto Salazar, hereby referred to as respondent or Mr. Salazar, in connection with his work as a coach at the Nike Oregon Project. Claimant United States Anti-Doping Agency, hereby referred to as claimant or USADA, charged Mr. Salazar with the following anti-doping rule violations under the IAAF anti-doping rules from 2009 to present, the USADA protocol for Olympic and Paralympic movement testing, the USOC anti-doping policies, the YI Code of Ethics. Okay, the charges are these 5. Possession of prohibited substances and or methods including testosterone and prohibited IV infusions and related equipment such as needles, IV bags, and syringes, storage containers, and other infusion equipment and devices. Charge number 2, trafficking and or attempted trafficking of testosterone and prohibited IV infusions. Charge number 3, administration and or attempted administration of testosterone and prohibited IV infusions. Number 4, assisting, encouraging, aiding, and abetting, covering up, and other complicity involving one or more anti-doping rule violations and or attempted anti-doping rule violations. Number 5, tampering and or attempted tampering. The panel finds that USADA has met its burden of charges of 1, administration of prohibited method, 2, tampering and or attempted tampering of Nike Oregon Project athletes doping control, 3, trafficking and or attempted trafficking of testosterone. These violations collectively are considered as Mr. Salazar's first anti-doping rule violation. This is the most severe sanction imposed among these violations, that of the administration of a prohibited method under both the 2009 and 2015 code. The panel finds that USADA failed to meet its burden of charges of possession of prohibited substances and or methods relating to prohibited methods and substances of testosterone, trafficking and or attempted trafficking of prohibited IV infusions, administration and or attempted administration of testosterone and prohibited IV infusions, complicity regarding the anti-doping violation of administration, and regarding Dr. Brown's alleged anti-doping rule violation. Tampering and or attempted tampering with the doping control process as part of the hearing-related conduct. The panel's reasoning for its decision is set forth more fully and specifically below. So that's essentially proving what they charged Salazar with, what they didn't charge Salazar with, and kind of the reasoning here. So I want to go into the procedural history from here, because there are a couple of things that are actually kind of eye-opening with this. That is, when the initial charge came out 4 years ago to when they were actually charged, things that were changed along the way, and so on and so forth. So the notice letter. The notice letter informed respondent through his legal counsel that a formal action was opened based on evidence that he engaged in anti-doping rule violations under the applicable rules set forth above. Notice letter advised respondent of the commencement of this action and further informed respondent that USADA would make a written submission to its anti-doping board. Then the charging letter came. In a letter dated June 30th, 2017, the charging letter, respondent through his legal counsel was informed that USADA Anti-Doping Review Board had met and determined there was sufficient evidence of anti-doping rule violations. The board recommended that the adjunction process should proceed. The charging letter set out same charges specified in the notice letter and outlined sanctions being sought, including but not limited to a lifetime period of ineligibility from participating or coaching U.S. Olympic, Pan American Games, or Paralympic trials. So, lifetime ban was on the table. Remember that. So this is not what USADA initially planned to charge him with, or at least the scope of which it could have gone to. On July 12, 2017, USADA sent a letter to the AAA requesting the AAA begin the process of scheduling the hearing and selecting the arbitration panel. The charging letter specified the following anti-doping rule violations under the applicable rule. So these are the same as before. And then number 6, which is a new charge that wasn't in the previous letter, aggravating circumstances justifying a period of ineligibility greater than the standard sanction. So this is essentially Salazar's warning that they are pursuing a greater penalty than what is typically given for first-time doping offenders, that being a 1-year ineligibility. They were seeking more, potentially 4 years, potentially a lifetime ban, but 1 year was off the table, essentially. On August 14th, 2017, the AAA sent notice to all parties of the appointment of the panel, Matty E. Olivio, Esquire, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so procedural motions and hearing. Scheduling order number 1. These aren't necessarily as important, so I'm going to skip down to, there's a little bit of back and forth over where the arbitration would take place, what claims would be included, what wording would be used. I think you'll find, so in procedural order number 4, reviewing the parties' submissions, the panel ordered the parties to produce certain documents without further delay or objection. The panel ruled some of USADA's documents are protected from production, including documents that would not be used at the hearing to be related to any witness who would testify at the hearing, and documents that were prepared by and exchanged among USADA and the investigators and or USADA's counsel. So this is essentially saying that there are people that could not be implicated because of reasons that they would have to be redacted. After conducting an in-camera review of unredacted documents produced by a respondent, the panel issued procedural order number 5, which ordered respondent to produce to USADA without further delay or objection additional specific unredacted documents. So it's kind of a back and forth that Salazar's camp, Nike Oregon Project, Nike, took their time producing documents. USADA did the same to try to get all their ducks in the row, and the independent counsel is essentially like, hey, get your shit together, get it to us right now, no more stalling. Salazar at one point motioned for a file to dismiss and or strike some of the charges that was terminated, essentially. Procedural order number 7, after conducting a pre-hearing conference, the panel issued procedural order number 7. The purpose of the status conference was to discuss 12 topics the parties provided the panel for consideration prior to the pre-hearing contest. So this is when things start ramping up. This is May 14th of last year. We hadn't heard about it. So this is when people started assuming that nothing was going to happen. It turns out that they're under a gag order, that they couldn't talk about it. So while we were all saying that nothing was going to happen, this procedure was ongoing for a while, and everyone kind of ran with the idea that nothing was going to happen, but turns out that Salazar has been fighting this actively for the past 2 years. Procedural order number 10. The panel issued number 10 following the submission of USADA on July 11th of 2018, the submission of respondent on July 16th, 2018, and the submission by respondent on behalf of both parties on July 24th, 2018, concerning the production of electronic submitted documents, including whether USADA was delinquent in submitting the electronic evidence and whether to exclude USADA exhibit based on relevancy. Panel admitted the documents that USADA submitted late, finding that USADA's delay did not prejudice respondent. The panel warned USADA that it would impose sanctions should USADA neglect any other deadlines. This is the final straw from the arbitrator, saying that USADA has taken enough time, that they have stalled enough getting all their evidence together. This is kind of a point in Salazar's favor. So you'll kind of find that this isn't as much of a slam dunk as you would maybe want, as someone who wants to see Salazar nailed to the cross. My personal bias following the story after the USADA report, I was kind of disappointed with some of the stuff in this procedural order, because there is some games by USADA that I didn't necessarily agree with how they handled this whole charge. Procedural order number 11, on August 2nd, 2018, USADA requested the panel hear the testimony of Mr. Noel Kirsch and Dr. Stephen Hoffart, 2 new witnesses at the August 7th, 2018 hearing in Houston. Respondent objected. The panel heard the parties' counsel's oral submissions during the status conference held on August 3rd, 2018, and found that the proposed testimony was not relevant or material to the outcome of this matter and denied their request. So, procedural order number 11 is essentially them coming in, saying, hey, we have these new witnesses, we'd like you to hear their testimony, and then the arbitrary counsel not allowing that testimony. So that's a little bit iffy as well. Now, procedural order number 12 is completely redacted, so I can only assume that this was either USADA or maybe even Salazar's camp offering another witness's testimony and the witness not being allowed to be on the record. So something happened in procedural order number 12 that's completely off the record that we don't know about. So this would have happened in October of 2018, probably. November 7th, 2018, the panel issued procedural order number 13, which addressed the respondents' motions during USADA's recent submission of the Joint Defense Agreement, dated July 30th, 2018, between respondent Dr. Brown and Nike Inc. So this might have actually been it. It might have been something between having to do with Brown's indictment, or maybe something to do with Nike. USADA's request to introduce certain emails as evidence of this matter. Oh, so maybe it was referring to certain emails that couldn't be on the record. The panel found there was no common interest as joint defense privilege among Nike and the respondent. The panel further ordered that the notice of USADA's anticipated request for leave to file a motion and amend tampering claim, and respondent's response to notice of USADA's anticipated request to leave for file a motion and amend claim be treated as a motion and opposition. After reviewing the parties' submissions, the panel granted USADA's motion to amend its tampering claim. The panel sent out the schedule for the parties to address. That actually might have been what happened. They might have been discussing the tampering claim. It was redacted because of sensitive names, I would think. It has to do something with names. There'd be no other reason that they would redact order number 12. On to number 14, USADA makes a more definite statement of additional claim related to USADA's additional tampering claim in the post-hearing brief. In its more definite statement of additional claim, USADA submitted and cited to exhibits 1010, 1014, 1015, and 1101 on December 22nd, 2018, and respondent challenged the admissibility of the subject documents in its written submission. Pre-hearing and post-hearing briefs and in-person hearings. So this is just going through everyone that came for a hearing. I'm not going to go through these because It doesn't give any information. It just tells you who was there, who wasn't there. Okay. Tampering and or attempted tampering with any part of doping control. Is Article 2.5, conduct which subverts the doping control process but which would not otherwise be included in the definition of prohibited methods. Tampering shall include without limitation intentional interfering or attempted to interfere with the doping control official, providing fraudulent information to an anti-doping organization, or intimidating and or attempting to intimidate a potential witness. That's a lot of what's been going on. And I think if Nike was allowed to be jointly responsible here, a lot more of this tampering charge would have stuck, because there is a kind of a history of Nike going after certain witnesses and threatening legal charges, threatening things that would maybe influence somebody to not come forward. But ultimately, that doesn't end up sticking. There's other defined terms that we've talked about before, so I'm going to move through this a little bit quicker. Okay, so next I'm going to run through the witness list, and then we're going to get into the actual charges themselves. So the L-carnitine charge and the testosterone charges. So the witness list, and this is going to be the really interesting part. So for USADA, experts, Bradley D. Anawat, Chief of Medicine, University of Washington Medical Center. He's the one kind of in charge of the TUE committee. Gary Green, who serves as medical director for the Major League Baseball and as its research director on anabolic steroids and performance-enhancing drugs. He conducts research on intravenous infections and anabolic agents such as testosterone and dietary supplements. He also serves as ad hoc member of the USADA Therapeutic Use Exemptions Committee and USADA Adverse Analytic Committee. Margaret Weirman, professor in medicine, physiology, and biophysics at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, and chief endocrinology at the Denver, Colorado Veterans Affairs. Dr. Weirman has served on many endocrine society committees, including the annual meeting steering committee and educational programs committee. So this is essentially the person brought in to talk about Dr. Brown, whereas Anna Walt and Green were kind of brought in to talk about TUEs, testosterone, and how it might affect things. NOP employees, athletes, related persons, and contractors. Steve Magnus, good friend of the pod, Steve Magnus, former assistant coach of the Nike Oregon Project from January 2011 to May 2012, competitive runner in college and a graduate degree in exercise science. Alan Kupsak, former massage therapist at the Nike Oregon Project from 2005 until September 2005, and again September 2008 until June 2011. Dathan Ritson, I'm an athlete with Nike Oregon Project from 2009 to 2014, competed on the U.S. Olympic teams in 2004, 2008, and 2012. Alvina Begay, an athlete from the Nike Oregon Project from May/June 2011 until the Olympic trials in 2012. Lindsay Allen Horn, an athlete with Nike Oregon Project from 2011 until 2013. Kara Goucher, an athlete with Nike Oregon Project from early 2004 until 2011. She earned a silver medal in 10K in 2007 and was a member of 2008-2012 Olympic teams. Andrew Begley, married to Amy Begley, an athlete with Nike Oregon Project from December 6th until 2011. The Begleys, you might remember from my Atlanta Track Club podcast, where they are currently the coaches there. USADA employees, Amy Eichner, USADA employee working in the drug reference department since 2009 on the drug reference hotline. Matthew Federick, PhD, USADA chief science officer. Former Nike employee Dan Mackey, worked for Nike from August 2011 to October 2010. Worked with Dr. Meyer, head of Nike Lab, with blood draws, blood testing, and analyzing blood panels. Former Nike contractor employees, Jeffrey Brown, MD, endocrinologist, the one who started all this mess, and Diane Gonzalez, Dr. Brown's medical assistant. The witnesses for Salazar: Francis Stevens, PhD, head of research at School of Biomedical Sciences, author of studies concerning L-carnitine and its role in metabolism. Paul Scott, president and chief science officer of Scott Analytics. Gerald Levine, endocrinologist in private practice. Respondents: physicians and personnel. Christina Harp, physician specializing in internal medicine. Blake Cole, Jeffrey Brown. Pharmacist: Shannon Magudog, pharmacist and owner of Compounding Cancer Pharmacy in Houston. NOP employees are contractors: Darren Treasure, mental performance coach for NOP in 2007. Krista Austin, a nutritionist for Nike Oregon Project from 2010 to 2013. And Alex Salazar, respondent's son, and a business manager at Nike Oregon Project. Athletes who were called in: Galen Rupp and Syrian Leonard, who was a member from 2011 to 2012. Then there's Tony Salazar, Bradley Williams, who current and former Nike employees, and Dr. Brown's lawyer as well. So those are the players. Those are the key players in. And now as we get into the L-carnitine infusion and injections, those are people to remember because that's where these charges are coming from. So now we're on page 25. A little bit of ways to go, but I think it'll be worth it. I'm going to skip around a little bit, so I'm not going to read this whole thing because I think it might take 2 hours for us to get through this all. But we're going to hit the main points and the points that are very important. All right, on to the meat of the matter. L-carnitine infusions and injections. So just to reiterate, this is kind of the one that is more the gray area versus the actual illegal activity, although it is pretty questionable. So charges. USADA charged respondent with the following code violations in the charging letter in connection to L-carnitine: possession of prohibited IV infusions, trafficking of prohibited IV infusions, administration of said infusions, assisting, encouraging, aiding, abetting, cover-up, and other complicity involving prohibited IV infusions, tampering, and or attempted tampering. Factual background. Respondent in his coaching role was clearly eager to find ways to enhance performance of athletes being coached. He was introduced to a new sports drink coming out of the UK by Paul Winsper, a Nike employee, as set forth below after the below research had been completed. L-carnitine research, which I'm not going to go all through this, I've talked about this in the past, but essentially L-carnitine was supposed to increase the absorption of L-carnitine, which L-carnitine in the blood was supposed to increase the absorption of L-carnitine in the muscle, which helps with metabolism of basically waste products, which is going to help recovery. Essentially, it's with everything that's quote-unquote performance enhancing. It's just meant to help with recovery in general. The Steve Magnus involvement. After running at the University of Houston and Rice University, Mr. Magnus attended graduate school at George Mason and obtained a degree in exercise science. Following graduation, he was hired by respondent to serve as the assistant coach of the Mike Gorman Project. On January 25th of 2011, respondent emailed Mr. Clausen to inquire about a new supplement and other supplements you have that might benefit my runners. In his email to Mr. Clausen, respondent said that the Mike Gorman Project is known for our cutting-edge sports science and medicine protocols. Respondent explained that he had 2 athletes, Mo Farah and Kalen Rupp, who intended to compete at various races in the upcoming weeks. On January 26, 2011, Mr. Clausen responded to the respondent's email to inform him of the time it takes to load muscle with carnitine, advising the respondent that the clinical trials demonstrated that the performance were obtained when athletes consume 2 doses per day over a 24-week period. It takes this time to load the muscle with carnitine, and clearly the athletes you mentioned would not gain any performance benefits in the 6 weeks leading up to their next races. On January 26, 2011, respondent forwarded the information to Mr. Clausen about the L-carnitine sports drink to Mr. Magnus. After conducting his own research into L-carnitine studies, Mr. Magnus confirmed that Mr. Clausen was correct in that it takes the time it takes to load the muscle with carnitine. On February 24th, Mr. Magnus sent an email to the respondent that said, in part, "It just takes a long time because we can't get much more in the muscle than that with ingesting it." Another email to respondent, Mr. Magnus said Dr. Stevens' research looked really promising and the research behind it is very solid and thorough, unlike a lot of supplements, and is gaining a lot of recognition. Mr. Magnus emailed respondent again, letting him know the L-carnitine study was published in another research journal. Respondent sent an email to his OP marathoners, Night Going Project marathoners, that the greatest sports endurance supplement is on the way, and that the first batch was getting tested at an independent lab to make sure there's nothing bad in it, and then on the plane. In the same email, respondent informed his athletes that you'll start on OT immediately as it takes months to build up. Okay, so you would start on the supplement immediately as it takes months to build up. Upon receipt of the shipment of L-carnitine sports drink, respondent emailed Mr. Ritzenheim, Mr. Rupp, Mr. Begay, and Mr. Allen Horn and Mr. Magnus to inform them of the shipment. Response email said, "Hey everyone, I'm bringing a box of new sports drinks we got from the UK to Nike tomorrow. I got enough for 6 months for each of you. It takes up to 4 months to take effect. So for the marathoners, you need to start now. It definitely will help a lot of 10K runners as well. Possibly Steve and a 5K runner. Steve, is it worth going to the milers? All of you need to get it from me tomorrow. I'll be at the track at 9:30 for Jackie, Lindsay, and Alvinus workout. Steve, is it ready to go at 9:30? Yeah, that's pretty bad. Okay. Respondent also forwarded the email he received from George Clausen that attached a short document which provides product information on Nutra Met Sports Supplement to Mr. Magnus on September 28, 2011. In his email, Mr. Magnus, respondent said, "Steve, read through this. I'm worried that it's going to take about 24 weeks for Dathan to get the results. In their article, it talks about getting the same results in a few days as infusions. Please check into those ASAP with Dr. Brown to see if he can do it, and of course, if it's WADA legal. For everyone else, we have time for the supplement to work. For Dathan, we may not. This has to be a top priority for you this week. Jackie, Syrian, and even Galen and Mo. Take a backseat to getting Dathan ready. I don't care if you come to work, just get this figured out ASAP. Thanks. Okay, so here we have Alberto Salazar clearly exploring the idea of these L-carnitine injections, but also exploring the idea that it might not be WADA certified. So that's something that they will have to follow up with. Mr. Magnus responded that same evening by informing respondent that it's no good because it has to be infused with insulin to work like that in the studies. Insulin IV is banned by WADA. I'll see if there's any other way, responded to Mr. Magnus' email by thanking him for the quick answer, advising Mr. Instime needs to start the supplement. So, any insulin IV, I mean, that's the thing with a lot of these, like, a lot of steroids have to have a carrier oil to it, essentially. So for L-carnitine to be able to be absorbed by the muscle by IV, it has to have insulin as well, because the body is going to absorb insulin more efficiently than it will just a intake of L-carnitine. So you have to have that carrier particle with it. The respondent testified that the urgency related to the timeline of the L-carnitine infusion was due to the U.S. Olympic Marathon trials on January 14, 2012, at which Mr. Ritzenheim, Mr. Begay, and Ms. Begay would compete. Mr. Magnus testified that he researched how to increase the rate of loading of the L-carnitine. On October 7th, Magnus emailed Dr. Paul Greenhalgh, a researcher of Dr. Stevens' research group, to inquire whether there was any way to potentially increase the rate of loading. Magnus explained the purpose of this email to Dr. Greenhalgh by saying, "We have a runner who has about 15 weeks till marathon trials." Following their phone call, Mr. Magnus emailed Dr. Greenhalgh on October 13th the following. "Hi, Paul. Thanks for taking the time to answer the questions the other day. I was wondering if you could send me the protocol for the carnitine infusion. We were going to look at doing it here first to save on travel and see if that's a possibility." Then Dr. Greenhalgh responded, "Hi, Steve. If you use the carbohydrate feeding from the feeding study attached and the carnitine infusion protocol from attached titration study, that should work. Having never done it, I can't be sure. One infusion period should work, followed up with the normal daily feeding protocol." On October 19th, Mr. Magnus forwarded Greenhalgh's email and attachment to respondent. Mr. Magnus testified that respondent encouraging him to communicate with Dr. Brown in order to develop a process for the L-carnitine infusions. On November 8th, Mr. Magnus emailed Christina Harp, respondent's physician in Portland, Oregon, to see if she would administer the L-carnitine infusions to NOP athletes. Mr. Magnus testified that he did not know Dr. Harp at this point, but reached out to her based on the respondent's instructions. For unknown reasons, Dr. Harp did not administer the infusions. November 14th, Magnus emailed Dr. Brown regarding L-carnitine infusion. "Hey, Dr. Brown, Alberto wanted me to check with you on the possibility of doing this L-carnitine procedure. It explained the procedures of the attached study without glucose and insulin as explained below. We're looking at for Dathan or maybe testing it on myself to see if there are any measurable performance changes, Steve." Dr. Brown has expressed skepticism about the effectiveness of L-carnitine infusion in 2 emails he sent on November 14th. Dr. Brown expressed uncertainty in using insulin and glucose camping for Mr. Instime because he had a thyroid issue, and concluded generally that L-carnitine infusions were not a good idea. On November 15th, respondent responded to Dr. Brown's second email from November 14th by saying, "Hi, Dr. Brown. What if we just try it with Dathan? We have nothing to lose. If it works, it will get his L-carnitine levels up quicker. If it doesn't, there's no harm. Thanks, Alberto." In response to the respondent's email, that's a tongue twister, Dr. Brown reluctantly agreed to administer the L-carnitine infusions protocol on Mr. Magnus, indicating continuing doubts about how well it will work. Magnus receives L-carnitine infusion. On November 15th, the respondent emailed Mr. Magnus to see if he wanted to do the pre-L-carnitine exercise test prior to Thanksgiving. Then you fly there to Dr. Brown to get the L-carnitine infusion, come home and retest. On November 16th, Mr. Magnus responded to respondent's email by saying, I'm going to the San Jose race, but I planned on heading home for a few days from there. Respondent sent an email to Mr. Magnus later, said, "Okay, so let's try and get the infusion done by Dr. Brown. We could even do the insulin infusion since you're not competing anymore. This would tell us if the drink with that time works or not." And that is very, very bad to me. Mr. Magnus responded to respondent's email that same day and said, "I talked to Dr. Brown. He's fine with doing it on me without the insulin. He said with it being deleted for privacy, the response could be off. He said we just have to order medical grade L-carnitine and then we can get this set up after Thanksgiving." Dr. Brown and Magnus exchanged emails on November 18th regarding where the L-carnitine for the infusion could be obtained. In an email, Magnus and Brown said, "I will contact Monday the people who make the TRH, the tryptophan-releasing hormone, and see if they can get it." Dr. Brown testified that people referenced in his email was Corner Compounding Pharmacy located in Sugar Land, Texas, owned and operated by Dr. Shannon Magodog. Dr. Brown testified at the hearing that L-carnitine infusion given to Mr. Magnus came from the Corner Compounding Pharmacy. Question: and the infusion bag was prepared by the Corner Compounding Pharmacy, correct? Answer: I believe so, yes. Question: just like all other infusion materials that involved L-carnitine? Answer: yes. Magodog testified that the only two L-carnitine formulations Corner Compounding Pharmacy prepared for Dr. Brown were the 45 milliliter formula and the 40 milliliter formula, as discussed in paragraph 154. Dr. Mad Dog testified, "We have multiple L-carnitine formulations, but this formula..." Okay, I'm going to skip through here because this is really getting into the weeds. On to exhibit number 100. On December 1st, Mr. Magnus received the results of his post-infusion treadmill test and emailed the spreadsheet summarizing the testing to respondent. He reported a significant increase in VO2 max, and the result is very significant performance enhancement that is almost unbelievable with the supplement. Shortly after Mr. Magnus received the L-carnitine infusion, he went on a tempo run with Rupp, Ritzenheim, and Mo Farah. Rupp and Ritzenheim testified that Mr. Magnus was hanging in there during their run. Mr. Ritzenheim testified that it was a little funny at first, but then it was a little bit annoying after a while. Mr. Ritzenheim testified that respondent was excited about the training. On December 1st, respondent sent an email to Lance Armstrong, oh boy, a former professional road racing cyclist sponsored by Nike, saying, "Lance, call me ASAP. We have tested it, and it's amazing. You are the only athlete I'm going to tell about the actual numbers to other than Galen Rupp." That's a problem. It's too incredible, all completely legal and natural. You'll finish the Ironman in about 16 minutes less while taking this, Alberto. On December 12, 2011, respondent sent an email to Lance Armstrong, Mark Parker, President and Chief Executive Officer of Nike, and Tom Clark, President of Advanced Innovation of Nike, regarding Mr. Magnus' L-carnitine infusion. In his email, respondent said, in part, "On my assistant Steve, the doctor used 1 liter saline bag with L-carnitine and dextrose solution, which caused insulin levels to go up, thus drawing the L-carnitine into the muscles." That, to me, it's like using a precursor to get the same result, and I feel like that's 100% violating the spirit of the rules. So if insulin is against the rules, shouldn't getting an insulin response also be against the rules? It doesn't make much sense to me that they could use this as an argument. Okay, so moving on, this is the last part I'm going to read in the L-carnitine piece before moving on to testosterone, but it's a very bad look. So Mr. Magnus testified that while at the Nike Oregon Project, he was a competing member of the USA Track and Field because he didn't retire. Mr. Magnus testified that he registered for and competed in USATF sanctioned races during his time at Nike Oregon Project. He registered for and competed in the USATF Oregon State Cross Country Championship. Mr. Magnus registered for but did not compete in the open division of the USATF Club National Cross Country Championship held in December. Mr. Magnus also testified that he was told by a respondent to keep his fitness levels incredibly high because he needed to pace the athletes for their training. Respondent paid Mr. Magnus between $100 and $500 for an athlete to pace that. Mr. Magnus testified that in 2012, respondent entered him into a race to pace Mr. Rupp to assist him in a record attempt at the USATF sanctioned indoor track meet. Mr. Magnus testified that he did not end up competing in this race. Magnus did not receive anti-doping information or education during this time at the Nike Oregon Project, nor was he ever tested by USADA. Mr. Magnus did not compete in any races after the administration of the L-carnitine infusion on November. Mr. Magnus referred to himself as a coach for the Nike Oregon Project, along with Alberto Salazar in emails during his time. So that is essentially saying that this kind of forced Magnus into retirement because he felt that he could not compete anymore while under these L-carnitine injections because they were such a performance enhancer. So meanwhile, Magnus is feeling pressured to retire because he's getting these L-carnitine injections that are enhancing performance to the point where he's able to hang with Rupp and Mo Farah and Dathan Ritzenheim in long runs, which, no offense to Steve, but he's not, at this point in his career, he shouldn't have been fit enough to do. So given all of that, the fact that they used a insulin precursor to elicit an insulin response to elicit L-carnitine being absorbed into the muscle quicker, this idea that this wasn't an illegal thing is just ridiculous to me. This is clearly against the rules. This is clearly against the spirit of the rules. And I hate to use the word, I'm going to stop using the word performance enhancing. This is doping. This is clearly doping, chemical doping, which is by law illegal. By athletics law, this is illegal. And if this was the only offense, it would be problematic, and I would be saying, yes, Alberto Salazar needs to be suspended for 4 years, or suspended for however long. And I think I'm on the board that if someone commits a doping infraction, I don't want to be lenient at all. If you are cheating the sport, I want you to be out of the sport. You know, to be able to compete in track and field, it's not a right, it's a privilege. And if you go against the rules of that privilege, if you go against the spirit, you need to be kicked out. And all of this doesn't look good. So I'm going to skip to the testosterone part because that's there's a lot of other bad stuff in this L-carnitine piece, but it's going to take me another 45 minutes to read through it. That is maybe the worst part of it. The other gets into Dr. Brown's testimony, and I kind of don't want to cover that because I think that's just opening another can of worms. But getting to the Magnus part, getting into the association with Lance Armstrong, and then later it even gets into things brought up in the Johan Broyniel versus USADA case. So this was also part of the Lance Armstrong trial, which Travis Tygart was principal investigator on. So there's a lot of crossover here between Lance Armstrong and Night Gorgon Project, and I think that's why when it first came out, a lot of people felt so visceral about it, because not only was Lance an American hero and someone that a lot of endurance athletes looked up to, Galen Rupp and Alberto Salazar were seen as, bringing back the heyday of American distance running. And now here they are being complicit in doping. Okay, so moving on to respondents' use of testosterone. But yeah, if we kept going through that whole thing, it's another it's another 60 pages, another 200 exhibits. It's getting a lot into the weeds, and I will link this doc in the show notes. So if you want to read through during the weekend on your free time this week, if you want to read through the whole thing just to exactly see how ridiculous this whole thing gets, please read through. But here we are on page 88. We're going to go into respondents' use of testosterone. So here are the charges. And remember, there are 3. So this is part 2. There's another part after this, but still deals with testosterone. And I'm not going to read through this whole thing because I want to hopefully not take up 2 hours of the podcast. But the charges are this. USADA charged respondent with following code violations based on respondent's personal use of testosterone: possession, trafficking, administration, and or attempted administration. In his post-hearing submissions, USADA did not pursue the administration or attempted administration of testosterone. Consequently, the panel finds that USADA abandoned that charge and further concludes that USADA has not proven facts sufficient to prove administration or attempted administration of testosterone. The trafficking charge is addressed in Sanction 11. The factual background: respondents' use of testosterone. And if you read, okay, so this is kind of tying in other stuff into this trial. So if you were to read Jewel in the Sun, so that is where Alberto Salazar is racing the Boston Marathon in the hottest race that Boston has seen. After that race, because it's a really good book and you should read it, but after that race, Salazar has a lot of trouble with his testosterone levels, has a lot of trouble with just being able to run at a competitive level, and he's seeking a lot of different, TUE exemptions because he's just having a lot of medical issues after taking your body to the limit and really hurting your body's ability to recover long term. So that's where this use of testosterone comes in, because after the Duel in the Sun, that's when he gets a TUE for testosterone replacement, and sees some better results from that. So a respondent testified that his first use of testosterone for at least some months in 1991, 4 years prior to retiring from competitive running. He applied for a TUE for testosterone, which was denied before he competed in the 1992 Olympic trials. Respondent testified that he was not taking testosterone at the time of the 1992 trials. He testified that after competing in and winning the Comrades Marathon in 1994, he began thinking of making a comeback, and respondent had a representative contact USATF about seeking a TUE to go on testosterone replacement, which request was denied. Respondent again retired from competition. Resumed testosterone replacement therapy based on diagnosis from Dr. Smolovitz in 1994. He used testosterone continuously from 1995 to early 2006. His prescription history for testosterone from January 2003 to May 2018, with a break from May 2006 to April 2008, shows prescriptions by 4 licensed physicians: Dr. Jan Smolovitz, Dr. Robert Cook, Dr. Jeffrey Brown, Dr. Christina Harp. Smolovitz oversaw respondent's testosterone replacement therapy beginning in 1994. Upon his retirement in 2003, Dr. Robert Cook, an orthopedic surgeon who had treated respondent for sports injuries, briefly treated respondent so he could find a new primary care doctor. And approximately 2005, at the recommendation of Dr. Cook, respondent to testosterone replacement therapy was overseen by Dr. Christina Harp, a Portland area internist. Okay, so that gets into the background of why Alberto Salazar is on testosterone to begin with. And some of this, it's acceptable. I think TUEs, like, testosterone replacement therapy is something that I think a lot more people who are maybe retired athletes or getting a little bit older should look into, because it can kind of help with a lot of the injuries, a lot of the just aches and pains that come with aging, especially if you're not competing on an elite level. That's what I always say. I don't think that, as long as the substance is safe and you're not competing at elite level, I don't think there's any problem with it. It's just that when you're competing at an elite level, that's when you need to be on your best behavior, you need to be on an even playing field. Okay, so getting into kind of what was going on. So there's a idea that Alberto Salazar and Nike Oregon Project were so terrified of tampering that they took every possible scenario to make sure that there was no tampering involved. And one of the reasonings they give is because a different Nike athlete had been quote-unquote sabotaged by a massage therapist and giving a doping ban because of it. For those of you who might know what I'm talking about, this is the Justin Gatlin excuse that he used. So essentially, Alberto Salazar is saying that because Justin Gatlin's excuse, that, by the way, isn't true, was that he was given a massage by a massage therapist to use a testosterone gel to sabotage him, was the reason that they were so scared of sabotage, which is why they had to go about these testosterone treatments. It's just completely ridiculous. From what I know, from what I've been told, that Justin Gatlin's story about his sabotage has changed multiple times. And from the Dennis Mitchell video where he talks about obtaining testosterone for Justin Gatlin, and from Charles Gatlin Facebook messaging me and basically telling me that I don't know what I think I know, and that if I knew more things, I would be very surprised, and essentially is kind of admitting that Gatlin has doped before. That story is just bogus. So to use that as your justification for this testosterone experiment, which we're going to get into, is, I don't know, I can't think of a word for it, but if there was a way to use a made-up story as justification for your actions, it's not a good look, let's just say. Okay, so respondent testified that he was careful not to cross-contaminate anyone who he applied the testosterone gel. He would apply it to his upper arms and put his shirt on over it, as well as wash his hands carefully afterwards. He also testified that he never gave, administered, or told any athlete to use testosterone. He testified that he never brought his androgel testosterone to training sessions and or competition, and that he would keep it with his personal effects wherever he was staying, such as the bedroom or the bathroom. Kara Goucher and Steve Magnus testified that the respondents sometimes gave the athletes of Nike Oregon Project, and primarily Galen Rupp, massages, even though the NOP, the Nike Oregon Project, had professional massage therapists for that purpose. Mr. Magnus referred to an incident of this at a 2011 high-altitude camp in Park City and a hotel room in 2012 for the Indoor Championships in Albuquerque. Respondent testified that he did not rub testosterone and massaging Galen Rupp or any other athlete. Kara Goucher testified that she remembers seeing a respondent with testosterone among his toiletries at a Park City condo, where some of the athletes of the Night Goring Project were staying in 2007 for a high-altitude camp, and again in 2008 at an unknown place and time. Dr. Brown, a respondent, testified that he was not prescribed testosterone in 2007. And that is a giant red flag, that he still has testosterone on him when he's not being prescribed it. And, benefit of the doubt, that could definitely be for personal use, that just because you're not prescribed, it doesn't mean that you don't think you still need it. However, an elite coach using a banned substance that he isn't prescribed for is questionable. Mr. Magnus saw a respondent with testosterone on the counter in the common area at a condo where some athletes of the Night Goring Project were staying in 2012 in Albuquerque for an altitude camp. Mr. Magnus testified that while he was working at Night Goring Project, he came across a Galen Rupp medical record from 2002 that included the line, presently on prednisone and testosterone medication. Mr. Rupp testified that in 2002, he was 15 years old and was not using testosterone. But, okay, so this one is because Rupp has bad asthma, so prednisone is a common asthma medication. So that's kind of a weird point. Okay. So, respondents' role in medical treatment at Night Goring Project, focus on increasing testosterone levels. As a result of the introduction from Kara and Adam Goucher, Dr. Brown started advising respondent with respect to other athletes of the Night Goring Project in 2005 as an unpaid consultant. In 2008, Dr. Brown became a paid MOP consultant, and that relationship lasted until 2013 when his contract expired. During this time, Dr. Brown testified that he believed he was the personal physician of several athletes in the Night Goring Project based on referrals by the respondent. Dr. Brown had a close working relationship with the respondent in his capacity as head of the Night Goring Project, reflected by the fact that he flew on Nike corporate jet to the 2008 Olympic Games. He was quoted in a Wall Street Journal article in 2013 saying, "The patients I've treated have won 15 Olympic gold medals." So this is all not great because Dr. Brown, in a separate 100-page document, also has his own crimes to answer for. But this is essentially talking about how the Gouchers introduced Brown to Salazar and other Nike Goring Project athletes who were then being treated for hypothyroidism, even though they didn't necessarily have hypothyroidism. And this is all very questionable, and I think in a later podcast I'm going to get into this in more of the Dr. Brown testimony, because this takes kind of a left turn. But this talks to some of the questionable activities. So in one of the exhibits, so 344, Danny Mackey testified that while he was working at the Nike lab in 2008, and Dr. Meyer suggested that he go see Dr. Brown and that he take thyroid and testosterone therapy, whereupon Mr. Mackey asked for him for more detail. He was concerned about the suggestion because he was a competitive athlete. And Dr. Meyer, according to Mr. Mackey, said, "This is what Alberto Salazar's athletes do, and they haven't gotten caught. You'll be okay." So this idea that this hypothyroid medication was being given to athletes who are maybe on a questionable scale, and that something that I've kind of talked about before, kind of at the beginning of this, when athletes are at a high level of training. So this has kind of been one of the reasons given why the uptake of hypothyroid medication is given out to elite athletes in TUEs, because you can kind of track that. When athletes are training hard, so if you think of top level Night Goring Project athletes, they're probably running 120 to 130 miles a week. There's a way that you can not take care of your nutrition, not take care of your recovery, and put your body in a depleted state. So if you think of high mileage runs, high mileage weeks, that after those weeks, your body is virtually depleted in a lot of levels. Like you're probably going to be under the level of testosterone, under the level, like your things are not going to be optimally working. And you can kind of induce these environments that if you're tested for something, you can probably come up low and thus receive a TUE, and now you're clear when your levels return to normal. Respondent and USADA presented detailed, lengthy, and contradicting expert opinions regarding the propriety of Dr. Brown's thyroid diagnosis and treatment of Night Goring Project athletes. This is why I don't want to get into it too much, because there's a lot of back and forth that is more hearsay. So that's kind of what goes into maybe some ethical concerns when it comes to testosterone, when it comes to talking about Dr. Brown's TUE use. Dathan Ritzenheim, because he was a whistleblower, is named a lot And there's kind of a question that if Nathan Ritzenheim has been healthy his whole career, he is potentially the U.S.'s greatest distance athlete, and he probably doesn't come out as a whistleblower because he has everything to lose. But here he is, kind of blowing this thing wide open. Same with Kara Goucher. Kara Goucher was also named a lot in this report because she had a lot of information. And, at the tail end of your career, she was in a position to provide a lot of this. I mean, you're talking about people who there isn't a lot of incentive to come forward in the prime of your career. Because what happens is, especially in, if you think about 2007, 2008, Nike and Adidas are kind of the only shows in town. So if you're not sponsored by Nike, you're not sponsored by Adidas, there weren't a whole lot of options for you elsewhere. So now where the post-collegiate scene is a little bit more exciting, there's a couple more options in there's a little more incentive to come forward. And especially when you're an Olympic athlete in general, there's people that are going to come after you for endorsements. But back then, if you're thinking over a decade ago, there is not much incentive to come forward. And in fact, if you were to say in 2009, you were to come out and be a whistleblower, you're going to have a lot of people fighting back against you because of Nike's power in the industry. And you're not going to be able to find a lot of people who want to touch you afterwards. So even then, for Gouchers, for Ritzenheim to come out, there's been people saying that they only came out because they're at the end of their careers and didn't have anything to gain. And I think that's neglecting the courage that's going to take to work against your sponsors, to go against maybe the status quo. I think regardless, there's a lot of courage there. And even if you don't necessarily have as much to lose as you would have in your heyday, it still takes a lot to make that decision. So everyone discounting their testimony because of the fact that they're not in the prime of their careers anymore needs to kind of re-center their compass as far as that goes. Okay. So let's go into the testosterone experiment, because this is, I think, the most damning thing. There isn't as much hearsay, there's a lot more fact, and there's a lot more just plain illegal things going on here. Okay, so charges. USADA charged respondent with the following code violations based on a testosterone experiment: possession, trafficking, complicity. Factual background. Mr. Rupp testified that he was approached after finishing a race at the Oregon Twilight track meet on May 9, 2009 by Chris Westeen. He felt that Chris Westeen rubbed something wet on his back. He was concerned about potential sabotage. Respondent left a message on the USADA voicemail system and sent an email to USADA's CEO about the incident that night, early morning the next day, to alert him that he was suspicious that Westeen could possibly rub something onto Galen. Numerous witnesses testified that respondent had a long history of concern about the potential sabotage. Alex Salazar testified about how his father had shared concerns over somebody spiking a drink, somebody rubbing something on somebody, and other sabotage-related scenarios. According to Alex Salazar, respondent was so concerned with sabotage that he poured out the water bottles of his athletes after they were left unaccompanied, and he asked Galen Rupp and Mo Farah to travel with their medication supplements locked in the middle of a box and to keep water in a locked cooler to prevent tampering. Respondent also placed a signed strip of tape on a package that he planned to send to the UK Athletics as a way of ensuring that the package was not tampered with. He cautioned his athletes at the Nike Oregon Project not to give high fives or allow anyone to touch them after races, and he told his athletes at Nike Oregon Project that they never let water bottles out of their sight or the sight of someone they really, really trust. So this is, again, I love that a lot of this is listening to the Ben Johnson excuse and the Justin Gatlin excuse and taking it to heart and be like, okay, you can't do this. The plan to conduct... Okay, so the incident with Mr. Wetstein, who had just been accused of sabotaging another lead athlete during a massage, Justin Gatlin, prompted respondent to develop and conduct an experiment to determine if it would be possible for someone to surreptitiously sabotage a competitor through topical application of testosterone gel after a race. The plan to conduct a testosterone experiment arose from a conversation between respondent and Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown then designed the protocol for the experiment to include administering testosterone on subjects who would run 5,000 meters, 10,000 meters, And as reported by Dr. Brown and Mark Parker by email in 2009, the protocol tested only an amount that was likely to go undetected by an athlete, starting with 1 and 2 pumps after a run on the treadmill for about 20 minutes at an ambient temperature 85 degrees, all to simulate the conditions post-running and determine the minimal amount of gel that would cause a problem. The urine was tested 1 hour after application of testosterone gel, but at no other time after the application. In addition, there was no performance testing in conjunction with the testosterone experiment. Tony and Alex Salazar, the subjects of the experiment, testified they were never asked to report how they felt after the application of testosterone or how the application of testosterone affected their athletic performance. Yeah, because testosterone has been known about since the 1970s. It's not necessarily groundbreaking. Respondent conducted the experiment on June 30, 2009. He testified about the details of the experiment, including taking a pre-run urine sample from each son and personally rubbing his sons on the back with testosterone after they completed the runs on a treadmill in an environment chamber at Nike Lab. So, for those of you that are curious about this, the idea of taking testosterone after a run. So after a race, your testosterone should be depleted. Pretty much, you've worked really hard. You've worked your body you've worked it very hard. You've worn out your body, let's just say. So you run a 5K, you run really hard, your body's depleted. By then, if you were to microdose testosterone after the race, that's going to raise up those testosterone levels that would normally be very low after a race and induce a faster recovery time. So you don't want to take testosterone before a race because it's not really going to do anything for a distance athlete. But taking it after a race is going to increase recovery, and in general, you're going to be able to work out faster. You're not going to have to take as much time to rest. You're not going to have to take your easy day quite as slow the next day. The benefits are compounded from that because you don't take. There's a common misconception that you take these performance-enhancing drugs to make your race better. That you take it on race day, outside of like amphetamines. So for a distance athlete, the idea isn't to take something to make your race better. The idea is to take something to make you train better and then to make your race better. So this idea that they weren't asking Salazar's sons how they felt during the runs after they applied testosterone to them, like doesn't matter at all because testosterone in a short period of time is going to make you feel better. It's the fact that it raises those depleted testosterone levels. It raises other things along with it, HGH. So testosterone is not a precursor to HGH, but it has a big role in how much HGH your body produces. So if you have a higher testosterone level, you're going to have a higher HGH level, which means you're going to recover and you're going to repair damaged tissue a lot quicker. So in these experiments, really what they're testing is what's the most amount of testosterone I can apply on somebody without showing up in a post-competition test. It's not about sabotage. Let's get that out of our heads. It was never about sabotage. Justin Gatlin's sabotage story is made up. That's not real. But what it is about, it's microdosing, 1000%. So, and yeah, okay. That day, the pre-run urine samples were collected to test Tony and Alex's baseline testosterone levels, collected again at the respondent applied 2 squirts of testosterone. Dr. Brown recalled being at the Nike laboratory that day. So again, this is happening on Nike's premises. Said that respondent put androgel on his son prior to that son exercising on a treadmill, which was designed to mirror running 5,000 meters. So he ran 5,000 meters. There's no way to mirror running that. Tony Salazar testified that his wife was either pregnant or trying to get pregnant at the time, and that he discussed with his father about making sure that it was fully showered off of me before there was any contact with her. Dr. Brown said he was concerned about Tony receiving testosterone because you had to be careful with androgel not to get on somebody else, though he said it would only create risk if she came in contact with bare skin without him having washed it off. When testing came back from Aegis Labs on July 7th, Dr. Brown wrote an email to Nike CEO Mark Parker, so Nike's CEO is in on this, remember that too. We have preliminary data back on our experiments with the topical male hormone called androgel. We found that even though there was a slight rise in TD ratios, it was below level 4, which would trigger great concern. We are next going to repeat it using 3 pumps. Why? Okay. We need to determine the minimal amount of gel that would cause a problem. but if 2 pumps raises levels, why? Okay. Mr. Parker, I'm like shocked reading this. Mr. Parker advising respondent that it will be interesting to determine the minimum amount of topical male hormone required to create a positive test. Why is that interesting to you, Nike CEO? Dr. Brown, concerned and forwarded the email train to respondent. He replied that he would permit Agus to speak with Dr. Brown directly about the analysis being done in support of the experiment. So this whole thing is just very problematic. Respondent's son Tony was tested again on July 19, 2009, according to the records. Respondents emailed Dr. Brown that he provide Tony 4 squirts of androgel for this test. Respondent's other sons, Alex, underwent the same test on or around July 22, 2009, based on an email from the respondent. When respondent on July 31st provided Dr. Brown the test results for Tony's second test with 4 squirts, they were both happy with the results. The results showed a rise of TE ratio from 0.8 before to 1.4 after a strenuous basketball game, followed by the application. He passed on the results to Dr. Brown, stating, "This is very reassuring. I don't think we need to worry about anyone sabotaging us. Likely, Alex's second round testing resulted in a TE rise of 2.8, still below the point which would trigger concern of a drug test." Upon seeing the results, Dr. Brown wrote, "Want to try 6 squirts? Respondent responded, "I don't think it's worth it. The 4 squirts was an enormous amount that was easily noticed." Later that day, respondent wrote to Dr. Brown, "I'll sleep better now after drug tests at big meetings knowing someone didn't sabotage us." Also, so keep that in mind with Justin Gatlin's testimony that upon a heaping amount of androgel that would have been noticed by the athlete, that it didn't trigger a positive test. Which is just extremely comical to me. On August 5th, 2009, Dr. Brown emailed Nike CEO Parker and copied respondent explaining that 4 pumps of androgel resulted in a TE ratio of 2.8, which he indicated would only be of concern if it was 3 or higher. In the same email, Dr. Brown states, "We know from the medical literature that 8 squirts would definitely trigger a problem. I suspect that 6 and 7 would also be a problem. However, this is not likely to be a major concern since the amount of gel of even 4 squirts would be quite apparent to any person it would put on. Women, however, are going to pose to us quite a problem, since probably as little as 1 or 2 squirts may as well trigger a problem. In order to test this, we would need to do a full-fledged research protocol, secure volunteers, and get an institutional review board to sign off on it. I think we need to keep our female athletes from having any physical contact with anybody until after the drug testing is done after a sporting event." Although Dr. Brown suggested they test additional types of gels and creams and had concerns that sabotage women might still be possible, respondent did not wish to conduct any additional testing. He did, however, tell his women to wear long sleeves after the race and not to have any contact. Respondent testified that he used his own supply of testosterone for the testosterone experiment on his sons. At the time of the experiment, respondent was receiving testosterone exclusively from Dr. Brown, who testified that he had refused respondent's request to write a prescription for respondent's sons to receive testosterone. Well, that's good. After asking Dr. Brown to prescribe testosterone for his son, respondent asked Dr. Brown if he could do anything he wanted to his testosterone, and Dr. Brown responded, "It's up to you. I can't prevent you from doing anything." So, that's high quality doctoring. Andrew Bagley, the husband of Nike Oregon Project athlete Amy Bagley, recalled Dr. Brown giving Amy a plain envelope that said Alberto on it, and she put it in her bag. She took it back to Portland, where she delivered the envelope to respondent. Andrew Bagley testified that he and his wife later had a conversation with respondent, during which respondent disclosed that the package that Amy had transported was the testosterone cream that he used on his sons to test it. Based on Dr. Brown's medical records, Andrew Bagley recalled that he and his wife transported the testosterone gel in August 2009, which was the same month that Dr. Brown proposed running additional testosterone experiments. Dr. Brown recalled sending the package with the Bagleys prior to the testosterone experiment commencing, but claimed it was placebo testosterone. Respondent stated he had no recollection of the Bagleys bringing him testosterone to conduct the experiment. Okay. Respondent testified that he did not obtain an independent review board approval. He did not have any written protocols, and his son did not provide any written consents. Respondent testified that he was assured by Dr. Brown that few squirts being put on the young, healthy males, there were nothing to worry about. So, what we have here are testosterone experiments done extremely unethically, and potentially you have figured out, okay, how many pumps of testosterone can we give an athlete post-race to not arouse suspicion. And, I hope you guys understand how much of a problem this is. Like, this isn't even a gray area. So you can maybe argue that although the L-carnitine stuff is questionable, and that while a insulin solution is legal, that a sucrose solution, which is sugar, which it would arouse an insulin response, isn't illegal, that you're kind of pushing that gray area a bit. This is not a gray area. This is like borderline actual illegal activity being conducted by a Nike contracted coach who has coached multiple Olympic athletes, who has coached multiple American records, who has been on the cusp, who has been one of the large icons in American track and field, and is just all willy-nilly about testosterone testing to the point where he's trusting this doctor is obviously extremely questionable. This is not good. This is what, if anything were to come back on when Salazar appeals this is not anything that you can go back on. This is illegal any way that you put it. Okay, so USADA submission. USADA argues that respondent meets the definition of an athlete support person and that it is uncontested that respondent possessed testosterone in furtherance with the testosterone experiment. Because testosterone is a prohibited substance, banned at all times, USADA argues that respondent cannot possess testosterone in connection with an athlete, competition, or training unless the athlete support person establishes that the possession is consistent with the TUE granted to an athlete, or other acceptable justification. The comments to this article of the code provide that acceptable justification would include, for example, a team doctor carrying prohibited substances for dealing with acute and emergency situations. Acceptable justification, however, explicitly does not encompassing buying or possessing a prohibited substance for purpose of giving it to a friend or relative, except under justifiable medical circumstances where that person had a physician's prescription, i.e. buying insulin for a diabetic child. So, it's problematic because not only is Nike CEO involved, but a doctor that has been a primary physician to multiple athletes is involved, and the head coach of one of the main Olympic development programs is involved. So, okay, acceptable justification, because let's go into kind of the devil's advocate here. Respondent admitted that he used testosterone in his possession and obtained from Dr. Brown to conduct the testosterone experiment. Therefore, USADA argues that respondent's possession of testosterone was separate and distinct from the possession of testosterone for personal use. As USADA contends that respondent's possession of testosterone for use in the testosterone experiment was connected to athletes' competition, respondent must provide an acceptable justification for this possession. USADA argues that simply having testosterone prescription clearly does not satisfy the burden because the prescription was for personal use, not used in the testosterone experiment. USADA further argues that neither of the respondent's sons had prescription for testosterone that could potentially satisfy this burden and demonstrate acceptable justification. Instead, USADA argues the only possible justification was the experiment itself, but that the testosterone experiment provides no such justification. To support its argument, USADA notes that the testosterone experiment was run without institutional review board approval, without informed consent, without a medical need for testosterone, and without a written protocol or analysis, and permitting such experiment under the anti-doping rules by categorizing it as an acceptable justification would open the gates for other athlete support personnel to creatively design experiments with potential dual purposes in the same way respondents' experiment may help respondent understand the risk of testing positive from sabotage, but also reveals how to avoid a positive test through microdosing. Thank you. Without any oversight to skirt anti-doping prohibitions and risk the health and safety of those involved. I think anyone with any knowledge of how track and field anti-doping works understands that this whole experiment was designed to reveal how to get away with doping, how to skirt anti-doping protocol. Like, to me, there's no other possible, like, even if you were worried about sabotage, why do you have to keep pushing the button? Like, if you're worried about sabotage, you just maybe just see if a testosterone applied topically shows up on a test. Why do you have to keep pushing it with how much would apply on a test? If somebody's sabotaging you, you don't know how much they're using. And they would have to use a monumental amount, something that would clearly provide even to get to the point before testing, you would use an amount that would provide a performance bonus in the long term. So this whole justification is stupid. Plain old, it doesn't make any sense. So that's it. That's the juxt of it. So hopefully that opens your eyes to what exactly was going on. And that even if some of these things are borderline, there are some really, really dangerous assertions made by the NOP camp. And there are a lot of things that they're doing that even if they're on the gray area, it's morally questionable. At the very least, it's morally questionable. At the most, Salazar should be banned from the sport for life. I'm convinced of that. Just off of this testosterone experiment, it's clearly designed to see how much testosterone you can use without eliciting a positive test. There's no doubt in my mind that that's what this is. Knowing how USADA, how the anti-doping tests work, knowing that you would have no need to increase the amount of testosterone used to see what elicits a positive response, to the point where, like, if you think of 7 pumps of a gel in your hand, like, that's going to be extremely noticeable, to the point where if you, like, slap somebody on the back, that's going to splash off. That's not, like, there's no way that it just proves how much full of shit Justin Gatlin is. But there's also just no way that that would even be a remote justification. Notably, some things that didn't stick is that there wasn't enough evidence to prove that Salazar was complicit in his athletes doping, and that none of the athletes were complicit necessarily. Considering the scope of this is kept to Salazar, Dr. Brown, Magnus, and his sons. So while Rupp and Farah aren't necessarily named, obviously Ritz was. So Ritz came forward with the L-carnitine things. So you would maybe assume that he was also involved in however far that ended up going that we don't know about. So this is what we do know about. Imagine what hasn't been reported, what evidence they weren't actually able to come up with. Because there is a scope to this investigation, and there are some areas that they couldn't pursue. And to me, the fact that the things that we can pursue are illegal and at best a very, very, very gray area, it's not great. So let's go into the tampering charges, because these are very interesting too. So I'll go into the tampering charges, and then we'll kind of end it there. I want to give you my conclusion, but this is getting a little bit long in the tooth, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. So, on December 17th, 2018, so not that long ago, USADA filed its more definite statement of additional tampering claim. To amend the charging letter notice letter, the following was added: attempted tampering or tampering in violation of Article 2.5 based on the conduct of respondent's counsel for which we can be held responsible, which includes obstructing and or bringing improper influence to bear, interfering improperly and or otherwise subverting doping control, including the investigative and or hearing process by attempting to obstruct, prevent, and delay the receipt of documents, testimony, or other evidence to which USADA was legitimately entitled. Conduct which subverts the doping control process but which would not otherwise be included in the definition of prohibited methods. Tampering shall include, without limitation, intentionally interfering or attempting to interfere with doping control official, providing fraudulent information to an anti-doping organization, or intimidating or attempting to intimidate a potential witness, tampering or attempted tampering of any part of doping control. The charges: intentionally withheld documents from USADA in order to impede its investigation into the respondent, and his counsel interfered with USADA's efforts to access witnesses and relevant evidence to prevent witnesses from testifying and or to limit or control witness testimony in this arbitration, failed to disclose to USADA and the panel that was coordinating his defense with Dr. Brown. USADA alleges that respondent violated Article 2.5 of the code, which forbids conduct which subverts the doping control process, included bringing improper influence to bear, obstructing, misleading, or engaging in fraudulent conduct that influenced or otherwise improperly interfered with USADA's investigation. USADA relies on WADA versus Fedoriva, which found that a coach committed tampering by trying to convince a doping control officer that individual was the athlete designated to be tested when the individual is not, in fact, the correct athlete. By urging the doping control officer to test that individual rather than the athlete whom the doping control officer was trying to locate. The panel found that the coach was responsible for tampering based on the underlying intent to subvert the doping control process through misleading conduct. Similar to the Fedoriva case, USADA contends that the respondent intended to subvert the doping control process through his improper conduct or the improper conduct of the lawyers Dr. Brown or Dr. Brown's lawyers, specifically his withholding of documents from USADA in order to impede its investigation. He and his counsel interfering with USADA's efforts to access witnesses and relevant evidence to prevent witnesses from testifying in order to limit or control witness testimony. His failure to disclose to USADA and the panel that he was coordinating his defense with Dr. Brown. USADA argues that Article 2.5 of the Code can be violated regardless of whether another underlying rule violation has occurred or proven. Okay, so this is that Salazar, Nike, and Dr. Brown were trying to corroborate evidence in how to come up with their defense. But since they were being charged separately, that's not allowed. You can't pool resources on that. And one of the things that we talked about earlier in the procedural order, I think it was in the first couple, that at one point Salazar's camp had tried to, had appealed to have the lawsuits combined. So he appealed to make, this essentially be, you have to prove that Dr. Brown and I were both complicit in this instead of charging us separately. And essentially, that is designed to pool resources, obviously, but also to make it easier to corroborate testimony. And that's clearly a way to circumvent things. USADA also contends that this is not required to prove why a respondent sought to prevent USADA from receiving information during its investigation, or whether a respondent was correct in his understanding that the occurrences he was seeking to cover up would have constituted a rule violation. USADA contends that the Court of Arbitration of Sport, CAS, has held the definition of attempt in the WADA Code can be satisfied even if the substance which is the subject of the attempt does not ultimately transpire to have been the prohibited substance. Respondent submissions. Respondent argues that USADA has the burden of establishing tampering or attempted tampering with any part of doping control. While this is kind of true, it kind of sucks in general, which is defined as conduct which subverts the doping control process. So you have to prove that what I did is what I did, essentially. You can't just give innuendo and say that I'm violated. So this is the one, because of that, because there isn't enough evidence here, is why Salazar gets away with this one. Respondent contends that his submissions, arguments, and factual and legal positions taken in this case are not anti-doping rule violations. In IAA First Step 2, CAS and the CAS panel recognize that right to defend oneself includes right to make any submission that he or she deems appropriate to defend him or herself, and to concentrate on or advance in particular arguments that are beneficial to this case. Respondent contends that USADA must prove beyond offensive and improper conduct to establish tampering charge. So that's why the tampering charge doesn't stick, because there just isn't enough evidence to prove it. Okay, so I want to get into, the arbitration panel's decision, because I'm a little bit upset. Because with all this evidence, it just sounds like that they don't exactly understand the weight of everything. So decisions and awards. And actually, we want to go to the sanction itself. So the panel must determine the sanction to be imposed based on its findings of multiple violations by a respondent. In accordance with Article 10.7, multiple violations. An anti-doping rule violation will only be considered a second violation if the anti-doping organization can establish that the athlete support person committed the second anti-doping rule violation after the athlete support person received the notice pursuant to Article 7. USADA provided respondent with one notice, which included the several charges addressed in this case and the post-hearing charges related to tampering and or attempted tampering, which USADA did not contend was to be considered a second violation. Article 10.7 further proves if the anti-doping organization cannot establish this, the violation shall be considered together as one single first violation, and the sanction imposed shall be based on the violation that carries more severe sanction. So this would have been, if Salazar was to be convicted of tampering, that would have been an automatic second offense, which would have been grounds for a lifetime ban. Okay. Where is it? Okay. Here the panel found the following violations of the code. Administration of a prohibited method with respect to an infusion in excess of the applicable limit. Tampering and or attempted tampering with NOP athletes' doping control process, and trafficking and or attempted trafficking of testosterone. Accordingly, the panel finds the period of ineligibility shall be 4 years from the date of this sanction. The panel notes that the respondent does not appear to have been motivated by any bad intention to commit the violations the panel found, which is just how? In fact, the panel was struck by the amount of care generally taken by a respondent to ensure that whatever new technique or method or substance he was going to try was lawful under the World Anti-Doping Code, but he didn't. With USADA's witness characterizing him as the coach they heard from the most with respect to trying to ensure that he was complying with his obligations. The panel has respect to trying to ensure that he was complying with his obligations. So this is what I don't get, because if you ask if something is legal, and then you do it anyway. So if you ask something is legal and they say yes, and then you do it, the fact that you asked that it was legal doesn't make it any less bad. Okay, the panel has taken pains to note the respondent made unintentional mistakes that violated the rules, right? Apparently motivated by his desire to provide the very best results in training for athletes under his care. Unfortunately, that desire clouded his judgment in some instances, when his usual focus on the rules appears to have lapsed. The panel is required to apply the relevant law, the World Anti-Doping Code, and its positive law enactments in the rules of International Sports Federation, in discharging its duty, and here the required panel defined the violations it did. So with the end, they kind of save themselves. But just the beginning wording, because that's what everybody's going to read, is the fact that, that he's taken so much care when he's designing illegal experiments on his sons to try to circumvent the anti-doping code. Like, to me, that's just beyond careless. And, the fact they can say, oh, it clouded his judgment because he wanted to win so bad. Fine. But that's the reason people cheat. It's not because people don't cheat because they just think it'll be fun. They cheat because they want to win. And that's where you get in trouble. Because when you win illegally, you get money that other people should have gotten. You get glory that other people should have gotten. And just because the will to win was so bad that it caused you to cheat does not make it any better than just being a bad person in general. Okay. So that's it. That's the end of it. Now that I've taken up an hour and a half of your time, I appreciate you guys sticking around. I wanted to call this emergency podcast because I wanted to put everything together, even if my tongue now feels tired. There is some misinformation out there that Alberto Salazar was working perfectly within the rules, and he wasn't. It's clearly defined that he was not working within any sort of code of rules at all. Even if the L-carnitine injections, because they didn't use insulin as a carrier, is thought of as a gray area, the fact that they used a insulin precursor in sucrose, which is sugar institutes a insulin response, which is what you need to carry the L-carnitine, that is usually considered the same thing. The precursor and the drug itself, for the most part in anti-doping, is considered the same thing. You can't use a lot of steroid precursors. There's a lot of these things that are legal that are basically precursor molecules. So that's, to me, isn't even a gray area. That's what I see most as the gray area, and it's not after reading through it more thoroughly. And I think, some of the charges, the things they didn't get charged with, I get it, because there's not enough evidence there. But Salazar needs to just stay out of the sport. I don't want to see him ever again. Which may seem harsh, but you see what happened with Dennis Mitchell. Dennis Mitchell didn't get a lifetime ban, and now Nike is sending other athletes to him as well. And it's like he's clearly been a bad actor for a long time. So I'm very much a proponent of lifetime bans. I think it's something that needs to happen. I think it's something that was sorely missed in this place. What I think we need to remember is that the athletes that were named in this, Galen Rupp, Dalen Ritzenheim, Mo Farah, are the ones that we need to ask questions of. No other current Nike Oregon Project athletes are mentioned in this. And this was 4 years ago. This was like 10 years ago at certain points. So the athletes that are coached by Pete Julian, the athletes that are coached by Tim Rowberry, I get it if you want to ask questions because they're knowingly associated with Alberto Salazar, knowing everything that was being levied against him. But there also still needs to be that benefit of the doubt, that innocent until proven guilty. I get it. I'm as jaded as anyone, I think, when it comes to anti-doping. But sometimes we need to, just for the sake of enjoying the sport, we need to remember that we can't assume that everyone is guilty at all times. I mean, there are elites that I know very well that I would put my life on the line that are clean, that are some of the best athletes we have, just because of their character and, I've seen how they act on a day-to-day basis. There are also athletes that we are very suspicious of. And I don't think we can lump them all together because there are Nike athletes that are great people, that are great athletes that would do anything to prove that they're a clean athlete. They'll do anything for a clean sport. There are also Nike athletes who probably don't care, who just want to win. Just like in any brand. But we also need to remember that the Nike CEO is wrapped up in this as well. So, whereas the athletes themselves aren't to blame, we can hold these institutions to a higher standard. And that a coach of Olympic athletes needs to be held to a higher standard than you or I. And that's just something that we need to remember when we're thinking about these things. So anyway, this has been a long episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'm going to post this on Twitter and the Instagram. It would mean a lot to me if you shared it, because I think everyone needs to hear the details of the case. I don't think everyone has read through it. I think we've kind of all pontificated on what this means in general to the sport. But just diving through the details, it gets even more disgusting than I think it is initially. So, you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, @HornickerJustin. I will post this episode there. Retweet if you want. I'm also going to be posting a kind of visual edit of it on the YouTube page, the Running Through It podcast on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe to me there as well. I'm also doing daily recaps of the World Championships are also ongoing right now, which I haven't been able to talk about for the past 2 days since this has dropped. Which Donovan Brazier just broke the American 800 meter record today. And there have been some great things happening on the track that I just haven't been able to concentrate because I've been worrying about what's going on here. Anyway, that's it for me today. My voice is going downhill, so I'll talk to you guys later. In the meantime, thanks for sticking around. Just remember to work hard, be nice. Happy running, guys. We'll talk soon.
Yeah. I'm here to change the game up, I'm here to shuffle up the deck. You'll probably think I'm famous cause I got a blue check. I remember playing ball up in Montreal, Quebec. The richest people that I met, they said they really were from Czech. My sales pitch